It has been a fantastic start for the Cavs season. They're already at 17 as of recording this video. They have the chance to be able to get to 50% of their win total from last year before the in-season tournament starts. And to come on here and talk about the Cavs, I'm going to bring in Cavs beat reporter Danny Cunningham. Danny, how's it been covering this Cavs team this season? Does it feel like you're finally, like, you've been watching these young guys have their ups and downs, and like now it seems like it's the year where it finally comes together for them?
Yeah, it's been a blast so far this year, partially because everybody's in a good mood all the time. Like when you're winning a lot of basketball games, everyone's happy. And to be 17-1 as we sit here and talk right now, like it's been an incredible ride. It's awesome to see development, I think, pay off for a lot of guys, right? Like you think about what Evan Mobley has been on the defensive end for the first few years of his career, where he's just been an absolute monster, and to see that start to translate to him being more of an offensive force, I think has been a really cool thing. I think the story of Ty Jerome has been awesome. A guy who played 15 minutes total last year because of a pretty gruesome ankle injury, comes back and is like a one of the leaders in the clubhouse right now for six man of the year. Like those stories have been so awesome. And the way Kenny Atkinson has handled this team and the changes I think that he has made without actually changing the roster. Like, yes, Ty Jerome, for all intents and purposes, is new, but he was still around last year. But they
Mm-hmm.
didn't go out and make a big move to the roster this offseason. They changed the coach. And I don't know that I can think of and it's early, right? Like it is November 26th as we record this. So there's still time for things to change, but I can't think of very many instances, not just with the Cavs, but like in NBA history, where one coach is around for a certain amount of time, the way that JB Bickerstaff was here, and then a new coach comes in and instantly takes them not just from good to great, but from like good to elite, the way that Kenny Atkinson has here.
Yeah, it almost reminds you, because I don't know, the Warriors got to the second round, right, with Mark Jackson, and
So,
then
right, they kind of have the inverse of the Cavs, where they got to the second round, and then the year after that, they lost, I believe, in 7 games in the first round, and that's when they fired Mark Jackson and brought in Steve
mm,
Kerr. So it's a little bit flipped, but I think like that is the best comparison here.
yeah.
There are a lot of through lines between what the Cavs are right now and what the Golden State Warriors were in 2014, 2015.
When you look at what Kenny Atkinson tries to accomplish, I think everybody kind of defaults to, and I think it was Brad Daugherty who made a point about this on the broadcast, where he's like, everybody kind of defaults to they're just doing the exact same thing that the Warriors did. But if you look at like his like history and his tree, there's like you have to follow kind of the threads of like how the Warriors even got there, and then you get to like Greg Popovich, right? Like in a lot of what they did in like 2013, 2014, where the Spurs were able to win a championship with, and I think people forget this at the time, because Kawhi Leonard became one of the best 5 players in basketball eventually in his career. But the Spurs were able to win a championship that year against the Heat without having anybody who was playing at that top 5 level that you normally expect of a championship team. Tim Duncan was at the end of his career, right? Like he was good, not great. And then Kawhi Leonard, still very raw as a ball handler at that point. When you look at how the Cavs play, do you see more similarities to that, or do you see more similarities to kind of how Golden State plays, where so much goes through the backcourt? Because I do think that's also a unique wrinkle with this, where the Cavs have so much firepower back there, similar to Golden State.
I think it's a pretty good mix. I had not heard that Spurs comparison, and I would have to say, and it sort of depends, I think, how you feel about Jason Tatum and how you feel about Jaylen Brown. But I would have to
Mm.
say that might be the last time that a team won a title without having like a true top five player. Because I think Jason Tatum's kind of like right on that border, like he could be 4, 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there. So there's an argument there that the Celtics did it just last year. But you might want to go back to those Spurs team and say, okay, that's the last time a team won a title without having somebody that is just a perennial MVP candidate. And the Cavs don't have that. Like, in my opinion, Donovan Mitchell is a top 12 player, but he's not a top 5 player. And I think there's a pretty significant gap there. Obviously, with the Warriors, Steph Curry was, in the mind of some people, the best player in the world at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that was consensus, but there were people out there that thought that. He won back to back MVPs, one of which was unanimous that comparison, I think the playing style is more so what the Warriors were doing in terms of how much the basketball moves. And Evan Mobley is essentially right now a 7 foot tall version of what Draymond Green was for those Warriors teams. I think it's really easy to make with two guards in the backcourt that are great shooters, a guy that's the ultimate connector in Draymond, like Draymond Green was for them. Evan Mobley is for the Cavs. Then things start to get a little bit different after that, but I do think that the bones of that Warriors team can be seen with the Cavs. So I think it makes a lot of sense to. I think both of those comparisons really do make sense.
Yeah. Kenny Atkinson kind of described this roster in the press conference as like, hey, this team looks like it was built for me. And like
Right.
he's proven those words true throughout the start of this season. You talked about Ty Jerome. I kind of want to get to the Cavs bench here. How much does having somebody like Ty, who I think just recently had 26 off the bench, and he was pretty much all of the bench points, because George Niang went 1 for 15 in the
Yeah,
last game that he
that was
played in.
a tough game for George.
Yeah, look, he's been playing well this year too. It's just like that. This was the one game where I'm like, oh, he did not make anything, and he was open all day. Ty Jerome, I feel like he does two things really, really well for this Cavs team that's like very vital. Obviously, he can score, right? And he can get on a heater from three, which is something that off the bench they need, especially when they have Dean Wade out and Max Strus out. I think another thing that he does is he also like puts Karras in a position where Karras don't go into, and this is the best way I could describe it, it's on me mode, right? Where Karras decides, he puts the headphones in and he just decides he's going to hoop his way out of a deficit. And with Ty there, I think it gives Karras like some trust and some other options. And also Ty can kind of control the ball and get it to Karras in moments where Karras can do what he needs to do. So you're not asking Karras to also facilitate and do all those other things. Like, how do you see those two kind of like making each other's lives a lot easier when they've been on the floor
Right.
together?
I think the ball handling aspect of Ty Jerome is a really great point because I have been somebody that for the last few years I've been higher on Karis LeVert than consensus. I think he's a really good player. I think his passing is one of the most underrated skill sets on this entire roster for the Cavs. But I
Mm-hmm.
also don't think that he's a lead ball handler. And I think that at times he's been tasked with being that guy. It hasn't been often, but at times he has. Now, with the way the Cavs roster is set up, because of how good Ty Jerome has been, that's never the case. Like he is always on the floor, sometimes with two ball handlers that are sort of above him in pecking order, just in terms of who is setting up the offense. So I think that makes him a much better player because he doesn't have to focus on doing those other things. He can really thrive as a secondary creator, not only for himself, but for others too. The thing that I really, really have loved about Ty's game so far is his ability to play at different paces. And that was one of the things that the Cavs were, I think, a little concerned about figuring out early on. Like there was so much talk about wanting to play faster than they did under JB Bickerstaff. And they've played much faster than they did under Bickerstaff in previous years. But they were worried about being able to play fast, being able to play like medium speed and being able to play slower. And I think Ty sort of embodies that. He's done a great job knowing when to push, knowing when to slow down. And there's nothing that says that more than when he gets into the paint and he just like he goes from fifth gear and downshifts all the way to first gear and ends up being the slowest player on the court. And he has these awesome finishes with his floaters because he's been able to create space by doing that. That's been one of my favorite things I've seen about him. But I think that he's made everybody around him better in a way that I didn't expect Ty Jerome to be able to do. Yeah, the 3-point shooting is awesome. And at a certain point, I would expect he's not going to shoot 55% from three anymore. Like he went 4 of 8 the other day and his shooting percentage went down, which is
Yeah.
ridiculous to say as we're almost in December. But I would expect that's going to come down a little bit, but he's still going to be a really impactful player because of all the other things that he's been doing.
Yeah, it's just a bonus that he's able to get you like 26 on some nights or 20 plus. But really, he was really useful when he was just getting 10, right? Like,
Right.
so when you look at Ty and you look at like his impact and what he's been able to do when given these extended minutes during this period of time where the Cavs have had these injuries, does that change how you think the Cavs are going to operate with their rotations going forward, given that they're going to get a lot of pieces back, right? Karras is going to come back. Isaac Okoro just came back last game. Max Strus, he's going to come back. Like, do you see any kind of good problems for Kenny Atkinson to have when it comes to like trying to fit all these guys into the rotation? And what role do you think Ty Jerome kind of takes up, given how well he's played during this stretch, but how many players the Cavs need to fit into their rotation now?
Well, this is the one area I'm very happy I'm not Kenny Atkinson, because he's when they are fully healthy, and who knows if they will ever actually be fully healthy. You can't count on that. Um, but if they ever get fully healthy, where everyone on the roster is available, there are 11, maybe 12 guys, maybe 13 guys that you can make the case deserve to have legitimate minutes. Like Jalen Tyson came out. I thought he looked really good in that game against New Orleans last week. I think Craig Porter Jr. is a legitimate NBA player. Those guys are, 13th and 14th or 12th and 13th in that list. But who are you going to tell of the 10 that are playing right now when everyone's healthy? So you've got the starting five: Dean Wade, Karis LeVert, Ty Jerome, George Niang. Who are you going to tell? Sam Merrill too. Who are you going to tell that, you know what, you're not going to get minutes because Max Strus is back? There's not a good answer there. You brought up George Niang. He had a really bad game on, what was that, Sunday night, right? He had a really bad game on Sunday night, but overall he's been pretty good. Like, he's somebody that deserves to be on the floor every single night. I don't know where you create room. I think Kenny's going to try and play 11 guys. That's really, really difficult to do, but I don't think that he can look at anyone and say, you're out of the rotation, you haven't been good enough, because it's not true. And that's a great problem to have, but it can also be a tricky situation to navigate. It really can be.
Yeah, it reminds me of was it 2017 when they traded for Kyle Korver, right? And you had this kind of weird situation. It was like, oh, what you gonna do with Shannon Fry now, right? He was so useful for you, and there were like kind of this
Right.
awkwardness around the rotations in 2017 because of that. So yeah, it's I think it's gonna be like there's gonna be small tests for Kenny Atkinson, right? Because he's doing well with what he's given right now, but also like getting more and figuring out what to do with that more and making the right decisions with that is also important. Can we talk about how Tristan Thompson just like has won this battle that is his career here, because he ends up in Cleveland and he's all he has to do is be the vibes man, and we're just like, yeah, he was on that 2016 championship team. Yeah, we happy to see
Yes.
Tristan. Like, it makes me like I want Tristan Thompson to stay on the Cavs just because it makes me feel good to look at him and be like, yeah, he's there. Like, I like that Tristan's there, but
Right. I do think he's a good, like, break glass in case of emergency option. You don't
mm,
want to play him a ton of minutes, but it's not a bad option to have. And it is cool to see him go from somebody who was, what, the number 4 overall pick over a decade ago, to win a title in Cleveland, to have some experiences that I don't necessarily think went great with other organizations, and to come back and really find a second home again in Cleveland. I think that's really cool. And this is a team that, for as good as they are, and we don't think about this because this group has been together now, but they're still a younger basketball team. They sort of do need a bit of a veteran presence, and Tristan Thompson can provide that. Like, he's somebody that I do think has the ability to, when they're not playing well, particularly on the defensive end, because there has been some slippage on that side of the court. He's somebody that can speak up, and he's got the respect of everybody in that locker room. He's got the respect of everybody on that coaching staff because of what he's done throughout his career. And even if fans don't see that every night on the floor at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, it does matter to how the team performs. So I do think that having him back it does have its real benefits for this team.
yeah, and like I think when I look at Tristan out there, and this is maybe just the old Cavs fan in me just saying this is because it makes me feel good, but it reminds me of like the connection with all the bigs that they've had, right? Where it's Andy, like Thompson. I don't know, he's kind of late in Evan Mobley's career to be his vet, but it's like nice that when I see them talking on it, I'm like, okay, there's like a lineage here, like since LeBron's first run here of just like solid power forward play from there. And it's one of those things that it gives you a bit of an identity, right? Like, and especially like in the NBA, I feel like an identity, so much of it is based around your star player that we don't really have a lot of teams that have identity outside of like maybe Miami. And then just because we're so like maybe because I'm old, I'm like the Spurs have an identity, but they don't play like the Spurs anymore, right? So it's one of those things that just like I think that does value in this organization. You can tell the stories like storytelling. It's crazy to the old man because I remember thinking like, man, if he ever gets a jump shot, like remember that era where we were still hoping Tristan developed into an offensive player? Yeah, we've seen how that has gone
Right? That's
for
what it was. If he
Tristan.
was just changed hands.
Yeah,
Yes.
because he was what 70% from what free
It
throw with his
is
other hand.
too. Right. Yeah. I mean, he played basketball with the wrong hand, and it changed his career. For now, he never became like an offensive player, but he did good things on that end of the floor. And he was at one point like he was a reliable guy around the basket. He just that jumper never came.
Yeah, with Tristan's a fun thing there, but I think also Jared Allen. My nickname for Jared Allen that I like to call him is the garbage man. And I call him the garbage man because if you really think about it, in society, the garbage man is the most underappreciated but most crucial person in this whole thing because there's a lot of organizations and departments that are government ran that cannot run for a day or two, and you may notice, you may not notice, but let me tell you, if sanitation take a break for a week, it's over with. Like, yeah, like this whole society thing. If there is nobody there to pick up the garbage, this whole thing don't work. And that's what Jared Allen is to me. Is like he doesn't get the appreciation of these nerves because he doesn't do the crazy stuff that Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland are capable of, or Evan Mobley is capable of. But he does so much of the small stuff and sometimes the big stuff that if he's not a consistent part of your rotation because he's injured, you're gonna notice really quickly, like in a week or two, if Jared Allen ain't out there, you're like, oh man, like things have changed. It's gotten a little different out there. I also think that he has done a great job of bouncing back from the ridicule that he got for the whole the lights were too bright thing in New York. How do you feel where Jared is mentally after just kind of dealing with all that, what he dealt with at the end of last season as well with the rib injury? Because it seems like he's come back, played some very strong basketball. I think he had 22 the last time he went out there.
Yeah, I think he's in a great place right now. I think that he's in a great place. I think he's happy. Obviously, he did get a contract extension this summer. And Cleveland is a place that Jared Allen wants to be. It's been cool to see him develop too, because he was really, I know we point to Darius Garland as the longest tenured guy on this roster, which is crazy to say.
Wow.
But he's the longest tenured guy on this roster. But I think that this, right. But I think that this organization changed for the better the day they made that trade to get Jared Allen in here. Like that is when I think that this organization really turned the page from, I'm not sure where this rebuild is going. There's some nice talented player too. Okay, we have a future now. I think Jared Allen that day when the Cavs jumped in and made it a 4-team deal and landed him, that was the day I think the page turned. And since then, he's been, yes, he had a really bad playoff series against the Knicks a couple years ago. Yes, he sat out through a very painful rib injury that I don't think anyone in the organization right now blames him for not playing through. But he's come back through everything that's gone wrong and been better for it. I think that those experiences have made him a better basketball player. I do. I think that he's been awesome this year. I do think also, though, it is the Cavs. It's not something they fool to. One of the things that I was very interested to see how Kenny Atkinson handled was closing lineups, because when you have somebody who has been an all-star that feels like they're an all-star in Jared Allen, and you know he has been, I thought last year he should have been an all-star too. When you have somebody like that, and you might be better off closing a game when they're on the bench because somebody else might be better at that spot, that can be really, really challenging to. I sort of liken this to, remember that Lakers team that won the title in 2020 where Anthony Davis was the quote unquote power forward because he started games at the 4. They had a washed up Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee start games at center. That made it so when, push comes to shove, they could put AD at center and no one can say anything about it because AD is that dude, and those guys are all past their prime. Well, Jared Allen's not past his prime. He's still a really good player, but for him to be okay with some games, not every night, but some nights being closed out with Evan Mobley at center, I think speaks to who he is as a person, who he is as a teammate, and where he's at mentally. I just think he's in a great place right now.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what makes him so essential is that he's such a good player to be
Right.
willing to play whatever role that it is. Because, like, a lot of guys in the NBA, they get to their role, and if they're really good at it, they don't want anything that deviates from that role. They want all the expectations that are involved. But Jared is willing to kind of move around and do whatever it takes to kind of help win. And I think that sets the tone in the locker room with these guys where it's like, hey, we're going to focus on what's going to be best for us to win, right?